Night pressed against the Siberian pines, and the air held a charge like a held breath. The narrator traced the old reports with care, weighing rumor against ash. Elias Ward said, "Some truths begin as thunder no one can see." A distant glow bled over the horizon, a bruise of light where no town lived. Wind pushed through the taiga, combing needles into a single shiver. Anya Morozova watched the sky tilt, and fear rose like smoke from a cold hearth. Maya Chen said, "Legends travel fast, but craters do not lie." The narrator followed footfalls through frost prints that did not melt. Somewhere, a dog broke silence, then silence broke back. The glow swelled, a second dawn that forgot to be gentle, and the forest braced. Dawn never arrived as it should, because the light came without warmth and carried a taste of iron. The narrator recalled reports of a sky split open above the Stony Tunguska. Elias Ward said, "If the world blinks wrong once, it never forgets." Birds fled before they knew why, and dogs pressed their ribs to dirt. Anya Morozova whispered a prayer that tasted of old smoke. Maya Chen said, "Pressure waves show their fingerprints in broken glass." The forest seemed to tilt, like a table nudged by an unseen hand. The narrator traced a map of flattened trees that had not yet fallen. Somewhere, a clock ticked slower, as if time feared what came next. The first thunder did not arrive as sound, but as a hand on the chest, firm and intimate. The narrator counted heartbeats while windows rattled in houses that did not face the wind. Elias Ward said, "Shock fronts travel faster than rumors." Anya Morozova gripped the doorframe, and Wood answered with a low groan. Maya Chen said, "Air becomes a fist when heat writes its order." Forest shuddered, then stilled, as if deciding whether to kneel. The narrator remembered sketches of trees pointing away like compass needles. The glow breathed again, deeper now, and the sky dared the ground to stand. Smoke rose where nothing burned, a phantom column writing its own scripture across the sky. The narrator weighed the word impact and found it wanting. Elias Ward said, "If no crater waits, we still have an arrival." Anya Morozova felt the floorboards flex like a deck at sea. Maya Chen said, "We measure absence the way sailors read stars." The air tasted metallic, and tongues searched for rain that was not rain. The forest held its breath until needles could not bear the stillness. The narrator sketched the map again, and lines became an omen he could not ignore. Then the sky clenched and unmade mourning, and the horizon heaved like a waking beast. The narrator braced as a bright seam ripped across cloud and stitched itself with fire. Elias Ward said, "Hold fast, this is the page that scorches." Anya Morozova cried out, and her voice snapped into the wind as if torn. Maya Chen said, "Record everything, even what we cannot name." The forest bowed, and a wave ran through trunks like wheat. The ground spoke in a deep vowel older than speech. The narrator felt the ledger of the world add a new entry, written in light. The blast arrived, not as a sound, but as a wall of force that folded the forest into splinters. The narrator traced the moment survivors described, when air became iron and trees knelt like grass. Elias Ward said, "Power, without flame, writes its own scripture." Shockwaves hurled reindeer into rivers and shattered windows 600 miles away. Anya Morozova staggered to her knees, her voice lost in the roar. Maya Chen said, "This is physics unbound, nature's ledger breaking its rules." The earth quaked, then steadied, while the sky burned white and blue. The narrator recorded silence afterward, heavy as a burial shroud. Hours after the blast, the taiga smoldered as though 1,000 hearths had been overturned. The narrator noted ash that fell like black snow. Elias Ward said, "It is destruction without a handprint." Anya Morozova gathered splinters from her cabin, her breath catching on soot. Maya Chen said, "Heat leaves its record even without fire's footprint." Rivers boiled and birds fell from skies too bright. The smell of resin burned through the valley, and silence grew deeper than before. The narrator understood that a mystery had written itself across this wilderness, daring someone to read it. Witnesses in distant villages told of a fireball racing across the sky, brighter than the sun. The narrator preserved their fear in ink. Elias Ward said, "When memory burns brighter than daylight, truth resists shadows." Anya Morozova recalled dishes leaping from shelves as earth pitched like sea waves. Maya Chen said, "Shock fronts measure themselves in shattered glass and cracked soil." Livestock fled, their cries echoing into valleys that had no walls. The narrator knew this was no ordinary thunder, but a voice of the cosmos. The glow lingered, painting clouds in ghostly hues of copper. Days later, strange reports filtered in. Herds of reindeer lay lifeless, and forests flattened in radial scars. The narrator marked each detail as more than coincidence. Elias Ward said, "The earth is a witness, but it speaks in fragments." Anya Morozova walked the blackened soil barefoot, her grief etched deeper than the scars. Maya Chen said, "An impact should carve a wound, yet the ground is whole." Eyewitnesses swore the night sky never darkened, glowing for weeks as if dawn had forgotten to leave. The narrator sensed a riddle written not in words but in silence. News of the explosion traveled slowly, filtered through whispers of comets, meteors, and divine punishment. The narrator sifted reports like a priest reading uncertain scripture. Elias Ward said, "Science hunts cause, myth carries warning." Anya Morozova whispered stories of gods hurling fire from heaven. Maya Chen said, "Each theory stitches fear into reason's fabric." Rumors spread across continents, yet no one had seen the impact crater. The narrator mocked the absence as the loudest clue of all. Silence became the greatest evidence, daring questions none wished to ask. The expedition returned to the scar where maps went vague, and the air felt older than the wind. The narrator marked new coordinates over old rumors and watched the compass hesitate. Elias Ward said, "Begin with what refuses to fit." Anya Morozova led them along a path the forest had never healed. Maya Chen said, "If there is no crater, look for signatures that forgot to hide." A motor coughed behind them, and paperwork arrived before welcome. Dr. Victor Orlov said, "Your access is conditional for safety and order." The narrator tasted the word order and found it edged like a sealed box. The sky kept its pale mask, and the pines stood like witnesses who would not swear. The ground, meanwhile, held its secret as if it owed no one a debt. The forest opened into a wheel of fallen trunks pointing away from a center that did not exist. The narrator drew a circle where nature had drawn an arrow. Elias Ward said, "Radial fall without a scar is a sentence missing its verb." Anya Morozova touched a stump, reading scorch in the grain. Maya Chen said, "Look for microglass and magnetite. The sky leaves dust when it bleeds." Instruments fussed as if shy, and the compass faltered like a tired dancer. Dr. Victor Orlov said, "Log your findings, but avoid the marsh to the north." The narrator underlined "avoid" and traced a second path in pencil. The wind shifted and carried the hush of a once roaring page. The silence felt curated, like a gallery with one painting removed. Camp rose on a dry knoll where evening sifted through smoke-colored air. The narrator logged samples while doubts crowded the margins. Elias Ward said, "Absence keeps repeating itself in different fonts." Canvas snapped as the breeze turned pages. No one wrote. Maya Chen said, "Spectrometer first, then soil grids. We test the silence until it answers." Footsteps approached, polite and unexpected. Helena Roth said, "I came for the geology, not the ghost story." Dr. Victor Orlov said, "Proceed, but report through me for clarity." The narrator noted how clarity wore a velvet glove. Kettles hissed, thermometers dipped, and the woods listened with old patience. At first light, the marsh refused a footprint, then yielded a secret. The narrator lifted resin lumps veined with glitter that was not from Earth. Elias Ward said, "If the sky shed armor, it would look like this." Maya Chen said, Melt glass. Nickel hints. Magnetic bite. We are hearing a foreign accent. Helena Roth weighed a shard and frowned as the needle twitched. Dr. Victor Orlov said, "Catalog, then return. Unstable ground makes poor judgment." The warning sounded kind and landed like a seal. The narrator packed the vials, each a small argument against certainty. Winds skimmed the marsh and carried rumor back to the trees. Hope rose like breath on cold metal, brief and bright. Documents vanished the way small storms do, with no one admitting weather. The narrator reached for maps and found hospitality instead of paper. Elias Ward said, "When a door is locked, the hinges become clues." Maya Chen said, "Data can be erased, but patterns linger in the field." Dr. Victor Orlov said, "Protocols require central review. You will receive replacements." Helena Roth bristled and folded her arms like a closed gate. The night swelled with insects and the quiet grind of distance. The narrator hid a copy under canvas and felt a boundary shift. Somewhere beyond the pines, truth paced like a patient animal. It would not come when called, but it would come. The campfire hissed under the weight of damp wood, and unease grew heavier than the smoke. The narrator noted how silence between words told more than speech. Elias Ward said, "The ground holds secrets, but people bury deeper." Anya Morozova leaned close, her eyes restless, shadows clinging to her like bruises. Maya Chen said, "We record anomalies, not whispers." Dr. Victor Orlov smiled without warmth, his pen tracing circles instead of notes. Helena Roth said, "Every finding turns to ash if hidden." The narrator sensed a mask behind the politeness, one that guarded something too carefully. Beyond the flames, the forest listened and promised no loyalty. In that tension, alliances bent and trust began to fracture. At dawn, papers shifted hands with ease, too smooth for honesty. The narrator counted missing samples and false signatures. Elias Ward said, "When records change overnight, the truth bleeds out quietly." Anya Morozova searched boxes and found them lighter than memory. Maya Chen said, "Metadata doesn't lie, but hands with power do." Dr. Victor Orlov said, "I've filed them centrally for protection." Helena Roth muttered, "Protection sounds like a cage." The narrator felt a wall rise, unseen but firm. Suspicion thickened, binding the air like morning fog. Every step taken left doubt where footprints should have been. By evening, the air trembled with a storm unformed yet certain. The narrator wrote that storms outside mirror storms within. Elias Ward said, "Every locked file tells us which door to knock next." Anya Morozova's voice wavered, heavy with grief she could not name. Maya Chen said, "The soil tells us what burned, but not who forbids us to see." Helena Roth tapped her notes in frustration, as though striking sparks. Dr. Victor Orlov said, "Rumors damage work more than silence." The narrator marked how he steered words away from fact. Thunder cracked far off, but no rain came. Suspicion widened its circle like ripples in black water. In the hush after thunder, a stranger arrived with eyes that did not match his smile. The narrator marked his timing as too precise to be chance. Elias Ward said, "Your maps are late, yet your boots are clean." Anya Morozova stiffened, instinct warning her of deception. Maya Chen said, "He carries no instruments, only answers unasked." The man introduced himself as Peter Volkov, eager to help yet vague in detail. Helena Roth whispered, "Aid without context is always costly." Dr. Victor Orlov welcomed him with unsettling ease. The narrator saw the game shift, pieces moving before rules were clear. Shadows lengthened, and with them doubts deepened into mistrust. That night, words dressed as kindness carried sharper edges. The narrator described how trust frayed like old rope under strain. Elias Ward said, "A helper who arrives without history rewrites our story for us." Anya Morozova sat by the fire, silence breaking her lips but not her thoughts. Maya Chen said, Too many voices steer us away from the crater that isn't there. Peter Volkov said, I know paths others fear to walk. Helena Roth snapped, fear is not a map. Dr. Viktor Orlov watched both sides and kept his silence heavy. The narrator sensed a crack splitting the group, thin but inevitable. The fire snapped sparks into the dark, each one a warning unheeded. The camp woke to a sky the color of cold steel, and questions hung like frost. The narrator logged a new tension as Peter Volkov spread a stained map. Elias Ward said, your paths skip the dangerous ground too neatly. Peter Volkov said, I follow signals, not rumors, and the signals point north. Maya Chen checked the magnetometer and watched its needle breathe. Maya Chen said, field drift like this begs for a source. Anya Morozova studied the trees that leaned as if listening. Anya Morozova said, I know tracks when I see them, and these are not ours. Helena Roth traced spirals on a resin shard and frowned. Helena Roth said, these marks repeat in ratios, not scratches. Dr. Viktor Orlov smiled carefully and advised restraint. Dr. Viktor Orlov said, procedure first, then revelation. The narrator wrote that restraint can sound like a sealed door. The walk to the northern ridge felt like stepping into a hum pitched below hearing. The narrator noted birds absent from a sky that should carry wings. Elias Ward said, silence is a measurement, even if it lacks units. Maya Chen paused, then lifted a small coil that throbbed near a stone seam. Maya Chen said, electromagnetic spill, narrow and steady. Anya Morozova pointed to sap beads fused into glass. Anya Morozova said, heat kissed this place without flame. Helena Roth scraped a sample that rang against metal like a bell. Helena Roth said, composition is wrong for this soil. Peter Volkov urged haste toward a hollow beyond the ridge. Peter Volkov said, answers wait where the ground sags. Dr. Viktor Orlov kept pace with a posture that hid intent. The narrator wrote that answers rarely wait, they lure. The hollow opened like a pupil, ringed by trees bowed outward in a frozen breath. The narrator felt the ground buzz through boot soles. Elias Ward said, if something arrived, it shed its skin here. Maya Chen brushed soil to reveal beads of vitrified sand and nickel specks. Maya Chen said, this glass remembers a temperature the forest could not make. Anya Morozova found a shard that sang when tapped. Anya Morozova said, it hums like a wire in storm wind. Helena Roth mapped a spiral lattice inscribed within the glass. Helena Roth said, symmetry too neat for accident. Peter Volkov smiled thinly and called it proof. Peter Volkov said, what fell was guided. Dr. Viktor Orlov cautioned that proof requires chambers, not a clearing. Dr. Viktor Orlov said, chain of custody, or it remains a tale. The narrator wrote that tales sharpen when denied. Dusk crept in, and the team argued in voices kept low by caution. The narrator counted the ways language avoids saying fear. Elias Ward said, we publish fast before it disappears again. Maya Chen shook her head, then held up the readings. Maya Chen said, we need replication, not a headline. Anya Morozova listened to the trees as if they would vote. Anya Morozova said, haste makes strangers of allies. Helena Roth traced the lattice and drew a clean hypothesis. Helena Roth said, directed energy or engineered fall. Peter Volkov pressed for a night move to a deeper grove. Peter Volkov said, I can lead you to the source. Dr. Viktor Orlov approved with a softness that felt staged. The narrator wrote that soft approvals often hide hard plans. Night swallowed the path, and the forest answered with a faint regular pulse. The narrator felt each beat like a distant engine under snow. Elias Ward said, if we are being guided, we should ask by whom. Maya Chen tuned a portable receiver until a narrow tone threaded the air. Maya Chen said, carrier stable, modulating faintly. Anya Morozova lifted the shard and watched it quiver to the tone. Anya Morozova said, It wants to sing with the signal. Helena Roth measured phase lag and counted a rhythm too precise for chance. Helena Roth said, pattern repeats at exact intervals. Peter Volkov stepped ahead, certain and unafraid. Peter Volkov said, we are close enough to stop doubting. Dr. Viktor Orlov hushed the group and motioned off the trail. Dr. Viktor Orlov said, lights there, keep low. The narrator wrote that belief arrived disguised as geometry in the dark. The clearing pulsed faintly as if the earth had a heartbeat. The narrator marked the moment suspicion bloomed into fracture. Elias Ward said, we are being led into a design not ours. Maya Chen tuned her receiver and confirmed a rising frequency. Maya Chen said, it grows stronger as though reacting to us. Anya Morozova stepped back, clutching the shard against her chest. Anya Morozova said, it feels alive, and I fear it. Helena Roth traced new notches in the glass and frowned. Helena Roth said, this is no accident of geology. Peter Volkov urged them forward with a voice practiced in command. Peter Volkov said, you'll see the truth, and then doubt will vanish. Dr. Viktor Orlov lingered in silence, his stillness louder than any words. The narrator wrote that silence can cut deeper than speeches. Tension fractured like brittle ice. Elias Ward accused Peter of holding answers back. Elias Ward said, your confidence tastes rehearsed, not earned. Peter Volkov countered with charm sharpened into blade. Peter Volkov said, you only fear the proof that will unseat you. Maya Chen intervened, her voice breaking the rise of tempers. Maya Chen said, evidence matters more than ego. Anya Morozova's fear turned to anger, eyes sharp with betrayal. Anya Morozova said, we followed trust and found traps. Helena Roth watched both men, suspicion heavy as iron. Helena Roth said, we cannot pretend the deception was not staged. Dr. Viktor Orlov chose then to step closer, his presence weighted with intent. Dr. Viktor Orlov said all knowledge requires guardianship. The narrator wrote that guardianship often hides the word control. The betrayal revealed itself not in shouts, but in documents folded too neatly. The narrator noted how Peter's papers bore seals too official for chance. Elias Ward said, you were never with us, you were ahead of us. Peter Volkov shrugged, unmasking himself with ease. Peter Volkov said, the truth is not for everyone, only for those prepared. Maya Chen's face hardened, the weight of trust cut away. Maya Chen said, you used us as instruments. Anya Morozova recoiled, grief drawn across her face like shadow. Anya Morozova said, you turned us into pawns in your design. Helena Roth snapped her notebook shut with defiance. Helena Roth said, then this ends here, not with you. Dr. Viktor Orlov, instead of opposing, offered Peter a nod. Dr. Viktor Orlov said, the archives remain protected. The narrator wrote that protection and betrayal share a common spine. The forest seemed to close in, branches bending under the weight of secrets laid bare. Elias Ward's voice cracked with fury. Elias Ward said, you will not bury this again. Maya Chen steadied her hand on the receiver as signals spiked. Maya Chen said, it's peaking now, stronger than ever. Anya Morozova whispered prayers beneath her breath. Anya Morozova said, let it pass us by and spare us. Helena Roth planted her boots firmly, determined. Helena Roth said, we record everything, even the betrayal. Peter Volkov only smiled wider, unshaken by the storm of distrust. Peter Volkov said, history bends to those who control its ink. Dr. Viktor Orlov lifted his voice at last with sharpness. Dr. Viktor Orlov said, control is the only safeguard left. The narrator wrote that control often becomes its own fire. The night broke open with light that seemed to listen to them. The narrator wrote that betrayal, once revealed, invites revelation. Elias Ward stood firm, though shadows clawed at him. Elias Ward said, even if you silence us, the forest already speaks. Maya Chen's recorder hummed as the signal turned rhythmic. Maya Chen said, This is not noise, it is message. Anya Morozova dropped the shard as it glowed faintly, fear etched in her eyes. Anya Morozova said, "It answers us back." Helena Roth sketched furiously, every line a stand against suppression. Helena Roth said, "This will not vanish again." Peter Volkov extended a hand toward the glow, certain. Peter Volkov said, "We are witnesses to intent beyond Earth." Dr. Viktor Orlov's silence felt complicit, a shadowed approval. The narrator wrote that intent is the final language no one mistranslates. The beam thinned to a ghost and left the clearing raw with afterlight. The narrator wrote that silence returned like a tide that forgot the moon. Elias Ward said, "Whatever signaled us knows we can answer." Maya Chen tuned the receiver and found a lattice of pulses folded into noise. Maya Chen said, "Pattern repeats, then hands off to something deeper." Anya Morozova steadied herself and looked toward the hollow that breathed. Anya Morozova said, "There is a door in the ground, and it waits." Helena Roth sketched the geometry, as if it might vanish with blinking. Helena Roth said angles resolve into intention. Peter Volkov smiled, as if a curtain had finally lifted. Peter Volkov said, "Now you see the path I promised." Dr. Viktor Orlov watched them all and measured a choice none could avoid. The ground yielded to a seam that clicked like a locked memory. The narrator marked how soil became mechanism, then silence split. Elias Ward said, "Stand clear, let the truth open itself." The seam irised wide to a chamber ribbed like a bell. Maya Chen said, "Signal strength spikes, carrier stabilizes near the threshold." Anya Morozova whispered a prayer that could hold a hand if needed. Helena Roth said, "Record everything, even our own fear." Peter Volkov stepped first and reached as if claiming old property. Peter Volkov said, "Discovery belongs to those who dare." Dr. Viktor Orlov hovered close, a shadow that wanted to be a seal. The narrator wrote that doors decide who walks through, not hands. The chamber breathed a faint harmonic that tuned bones rather than ears. The narrator traced symbols etched like frost on iron. Elias Ward said, "These marks repeat the spiral we found in glass." Maya Chen mapped pulses to a grid and saw language wearing rhythm. Maya Chen said, "It's a broadcast engraved in time." Anya Morozova touched a panel, and it warmed like a living thing. Anya Morozova said, "It remembers." Helena Roth found a plaque and brushed ash from a name. Helena Roth said, "Someone reached this place before us." Peter Volkov moved to pocket the plaque with casual certainty. Peter Volkov said, "Artifacts require custody to stay safe." We. Dr. Viktor Orlov blocked his hand, and the room seemed to exhale. The plaque carried a story that bled through decades. The narrator read the name Luka Petrov and a date stitched to 1908. Elias Ward said, "A witness we never knew we sought." A cylinder clicked open and spilled a cracked journal sealed against time. Maya Chen said, "Paper and signal agree, two mouths telling one truth." Anya Morozova traced lines that spoke of a hunt, a fire, and a light that bent the sky. Helena Roth said, "He followed the blast and entered alone." Peter Volkov reached again, but found more hands in his way. Peter Volkov said, "You are delaying history." Dr. Viktor Orlov sighed as if expelling an oath. Dr. Viktor Orlov said, "History will not be owned tonight." The chamber dimmed and left one clean sentence etched in light. The narrator wrote that Luka warned of a guidance flame that chose the empty forest. Elias Ward said, "It was steered to spare the towns." Maya Chen overlaid the grid and saw a path that curved away from villages. Maya Chen said, "Trajectory altered at the last instant." Anya Morozova bowed her head for a stranger who saved people he never met. Anya Morozova said, "Mercy can arrive as fire." Helena Roth sealed scans and copies in duplicate. Helena Roth said, "We will not lose this twice." Peter Volkov stared at a truth that would not be owned. Dr. Viktor Orlov turned and faced the exit, finally choosing air over archives. The narrator closed the journal and left the question open by design.